Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. It has been a while since I last made a tutorial. I apologize, been busy with work. Hopefully I can finish up work soon. And I've got a big backlog of tutorials I want to do. This one, so I saw kind of a cool little animation the other day on Twitter with this Apple event coming up. And I just thought, hey, we could do that in MODO, so I'll just make a quick tutorial. So here it is. This is what we're going to do. Here it is in After Effects. So it's just going to be, you can insert your own logos. So we'll do this Apple logo that morphs to a heart. And this little space starfield or whatever environment. And yeah, so let's just get into it. So here I am in MODO, and the first thing you want to do is make your logos, or maybe if you have an Illustrator file, you can just import that and clean it up a little bit. I just brought in Apple logos and put it on backdrop items and then traced over it with these curves, right? So there's the curve. I just go to the front here. And I used, as few vertices as possible. So using the curve tool here, and obviously you're just tracing over it, and you want to ultimately have it closed. You can also use mini props here. And again, use as few vertices as possible to make a sort of a clean morph because they're going to be moving around. And for the morph, you just go over here to the vertex map, obviously, and add a new morph map. I named it heart. And then I just turned on my heart 1 and just moved the points around the heart. So now we have a nice little morph. And I did the same thing with the leaf. I put these in separate items, obviously, because the leaf, I don't want to mess with the leaf having to try to morph into the heart. We'll just make it a separate item. So we have the leaf and the Apple logo to start. And now we need some particles in there that we can eventually cut into. And what we're eventually going to do is just use render Booleans. We're going to create this sort of particle cloud and get particles sort of more dense in the middle, and specifically even a ring around this curve using some particle modifiers and fall-offs. And then we're going to use render Booleans to cut this hole in the middle, and then we're going to animate the camera to get this swinging around effect. And we can use the variation texture to change up the colors of the stars. So let's just do create our schematic of the particles, and that's sort of the most involved part of this. So what I did is I used particle cloud. So you go to particle cloud right there. There it is. You want to make sure toggle locators is on, or this little button up here is on, and that's Control 1 in your pie menu, so you can see the locators there. And these actually have OmniHall built in. So you just press C, and you can just left click to make it bigger and right click to increase the particles. So I think I had around 2,000 particles or so in this first one. And what we'll do is we'll just sort of nest these. So we'll have one, we'll just make this sort of like, half a meter, and then Control D duplicate. We'll make this next one a little bit bigger, and maybe, right click down a little bit fewer particles. I think, around 2,000 for that one. And then again, I like OmniHall because it stays active here after you press, C for channel hall, and you could just sort of opt between these and move them around. And we'll make a third one, duplicate that, and just make that one a little bit bigger, and maybe even some fewer particles. And so we're looking through it, and eventually we're going to animate this camera. So let me just take off the default rotation value. So you'll see something like that, right? Sort of a circular starfield or spherical starfield. So let's pop open the schematic and start setting up our particle network here. Drag all 3 of our particle clouds into the schematic, and then we're going to add a few more items here. So actually I can scooch this over, I think, just a little bit to give us more room. So we need a replicator, and we also need a prototype. So for prototype, I'm just going to use, I made this quad sphere sub D ball. It's actually better than the one that comes with MODO. I think I put a little YouTube, no, it was like a Twitter video on how to make it. Basically, the one that comes with MODO is not very spherical, sort of an oblong cube. This is a better one, but anyway, you could just use a regular sphere. This is what I like to use. But okay, so that'll be our prototype. So I'll just rename that prototype, proto, and then in our replicator, proto, in our replicator, just set that up real quick. So right now, let's drag it into the schematic, and we'll drag our prototype into the schematic, and we'll plug our prototype in there. And I can actually hide it. We don't need to see it in the viewport here. We don't need to see the leaf either. And I can just go back. Actually, let me just go to perspective and turn locators back on so we see our particle clouds. And then I'm going to add a particle modifier just to sort of glue all these particle clouds together. And so a particle modifier is just sort of a general purpose node that will group together any particles you have in the scene. So it's really useful because it'll take particle clouds, particle simulations, other particle mod nodes, vertices. You can just clump them all into like one sort of container of particles that you can manipulate. So we've got all these things grouped together now with this particle modifier. And then I'm going to use a particle sieve modifier to just weed some out, to make it a little more natural looking. So we need a particle sieve, which is right here. Just drag that in. So plug in the particle source from our particle modifier. And the particle sieve, what it'll do, if you look over here in the properties, it'll give you a condition. So if particle ID or position or force, mass, fall off, which is what we're going to use, if this condition is greater than, less than, not equal to, in a range, then it's going to keep those particles, right? And it's going to discard the rest. So we can do in range is fine. And then we're going to change this to fall off, and then we're going to add a fall off to the scene. So we'll just add a radial fall off right there. And again, press C for channel hall and just left click and make that so it encompasses everything there, and drag it into the schematic. So again, just to see how this works, let's plug particle sieve modifier into the particle source for a replicator, and you can see this happened here. And I'll just use the general base scale option on the replicator to knock those down a little bit. So let's just kind of see how, turn off vertices, how this sieve works, right? So right now in range, it's going to keep, so remember the sieve is, you're telling it what to keep. So it's keeping everything from range minimum of 0 to a maximum of 100. So now remember this radial fall off is 100% in the middle and it falls off to 0 at the outside, right? So if I keep from 0.5 to 100, it's just going to keep in the middle from 100 to 0.5 is like halfway. Or if I turn it the other way around, if it max is 0.5 and we just go to 0, it's going to keep the stuff on the outside but not in the middle. If you can see here, the middle is empty. So that's how that works, right? And what we're going to do is just add a texture here to our fall off to add like a noise texture to the spherical zone we have in 3D space here, and we're just going to weed out some particles to just sort of a more natural looking starfield, right? So I'll just add a fractal noise texture, and or maybe it's just called noise actually, just the old MODO noise. Lots of noises. So if you see these kind of cool looking icons here, that's from the Shading Nerd kit, which has some really nice icons. Also the other icons you see in my MODO, that they're from Warren's icon kit. There's reviews on Pixel Fondue for both of these. I'd get them both. They're both great. Especially love Warren's icons. They just make MODO look more modern basically. And they're color coded. They're just way better. So plug in our noise to our texture here. So now we've got some noise in our sort of spherical zone, and we're going to weed out some particles based on the noise. So noise maybe. It'd be great to see like a 3D representation of noise in the viewport, because we're just kind of guessing what this looks like. But I'm going to actually turn the scale down to like maybe 0.5, and then maybe turn the gain up to 75, something like that. And then when we start weeding some stuff out with this particle sieve node, so we can go something like that. So let's push in here. So that's a little weird. We got a noise thing. So I think my noise scale is way too big still. So let me just go down to like 0.1 or so. Oh, this is the other thing you have to do. The fall off is the radial fall off. Still, it's multiplying the noise against the radial fall off, starting at 100%, 0, and going out to the edge where it's 0. So what you want to do with that is turn, just using mini props here, on the radial fall off, you want to turn the solid core to 100%. So that field, that radial field, is just 100%, and then they're multiplying that against the texture. So there it is. That's a little more normal, right? So if I were to say, do nothing, it looks like this. But if I start weeding some stuff out, you can see it's getting a little more noise, sort of Looks a little more normal here, or a little more random. Maybe something like that. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do when I set this up is I want this to look flat. So that means camera focal length really long, like 300. So instead of like 50, or sort of wider lens, you want something really long, 300, and then you're going to move the camera way back, right? And we want to fill up this screen with particles. So something like this. You know, our logo is going to be cut out of the middle there. So I may want to take this particle cloud here and make it a little bit bigger so it's out to the edge. And I'm going to keep a few more particles probably, something like this. Also keep in mind that these are going to be a lot smaller and we're going to randomize the size and things like that. So let's just, you know, stick here for now. We'll keep tweaking this. If you select this noodle like that and you add an item, it'll stick it in between. So I'm going to add a particle random modifier. And it's stuck it in between. You can see it's yellow, but it also hit it. So it'd be nice if it didn't do that. And the particle random modifier. So it defaults to having the position randomized like a ½ meter in every direction. Just 0, Control Enter to put those back to normal. We don't want to randomize the position. We are going to randomize the rotation and scaling. And you think like, well, why am I randomizing the rotation of the sphere? We're going to distort our sphere a little bit so it's a little oblong and we get, you know, some more star type shapes. We'll do that in a second. So for rotation, 360, and scale, let's do 200%. So, and also uniform scaling. So some are really big and some are really small. So what's interesting here, a couple things. I'm going to go back to my replicator and take my base scale even smaller, like 5%. And so we've got some pretty big blobby stars here and also a bunch of really little ones. I'm also probably going to just up my max particles in some of these, maybe like 1500 for this one, and for the outside one, maybe 1200. We're just getting some more particles in there. And for the particle random modifier, you have this sort of range minimum maximum here, which is kind of cool. So basically what that's saying is for the bottom range, the smallest particles, so you know the scale is going to go 200% in both directions, either 200% smaller or 200% bigger, right? So you can see I've got some little ones and some really big ones. Well, if I want more little ones, I don't want the big ones to go quite 200%, I can clamp that with this right here. So if I say 50% there, it's only going to go, you know, 100% scale wise for the biggest, but it's also going to make, you know, everything up to fully 200% smaller. So that's a nice little thing we can do with this, the particle random modifier, rather than doing it in the replicator. The replicator doesn't have that ability, so we're using the PMod for that, which is pretty cool. I can hide the grid and some stuff here. So this is where we're at with this, and so I think they're still like way too big, so I'm going to base scale them down quite a bit. Okay, that's more what I was looking at, something like this, and maybe we'll deal with the density a little bit later. I hope you can see this. Maybe I'll change the shading in here just really quick to make these a little bit more visible. So maybe green. Will green be nice and visible for everybody? This is default. Don't need that. Okay, that's probably more visible on YouTube. All right, so there we've got a nice looking particle cloud. We've got a little bit of randomization going on. We sieved some out to get some, you can see that, you know, kind of here and there. We get some sort of, you know, broken up patterns in there, which looks a little more natural. And I'm just going to make one more sort of group of particles to blend into this. And so I'm going to do that with the apple curve. And so I'm going to, basically what I'm going to be doing is creating particles that, sorry, I'm just rearranging my item list here, that will follow the curve of that apple to, you know, sort of solidify the look of that logo. So let's bring in the apple logo, and I'm going to unhook this for right now. And we'll just go to perspective mode here. And so here's how we do that. So I'm just going to, again, I'm going to add it. I mean, there's a couple ways to do this, but this is how I'm going to do this. I'm going to put my Apple logo in the schematic, so it's right there. And then I'm going to add a curve particle generator, and this will allow me to generate curve or particles along a curve. I'm using my Apple logo as a curve here, so I will plug this into the curve, and then we're going to plug this into the replicator so we can see it. And there you see these little, particles on the curve there. And so there's some great attributes over here we can adjust. So let's go up to 200, get a bunch of particles, and then over here on the curve particle generator control tab, we've got a bunch of stuff for jittering. So radial position, maybe 0.05, get it around that a little bit. You can just drag this linear position, which randomizes, the position on the curve, like sliding along the curve. And there's some rotation and scale jitter as well, but we're actually, we can leave those at 0, and we'll plug this into this random modifier above. So this is basically pretty good. So I think maybe a few more particles, maybe 400. Basically, we just look at it through the camera here. We just want that sort of outline, that shape of the logo that's going to sort of read when it's spinning. So just some dense particles along the edge there. It may be a little bit too much radius, maybe 0.03, just to get them a little more dense. I can hide my Apple logo. That's what it looks like. Looks like an Apple logo, right? It still looks like an Apple. Looks pretty good. So I think we're on the right track. I'm just going to Control D duplicate this guy and unplug it. Whoops, I'll plug this into the particle source there just so we can continue to visualize. And then I'll use my leaf, just drag that in and use that as the curve. So now we've got the leaf and the Apple logo there. And I'll take both of these guys and I'm going to plug them into my particle modifier, right? So then it'll pick up that sieve and that randomization one down the line. So I plug them into my particle source here. It's really annoying sort of display bug with the noodles there. So now they're in the particle modifier, like I said, just combining all this stuff together. Those particles are going to be sieved out with our fractal noise. They're going to be randomized. They're going to be plugged back in here. And you can kind of see the leaf there. We've got just like a more evident sort of Apple logo in there. Now, if I unplug these guys, you'll see just that, right? So plug those back in. All right, so moving on, we're getting close. So we need to now set up our render Boolean. So if I were to render this, let me just pop open a little render window here. I can hide this and hit play. It's like, okay, let's go to black for our environment. So I use these little preset drop downs for the environments a lot. I've got a bunch of environments here, black being one of them. There's a video on using these preset windows of Pixel do. It's worth watching because you can use it for gradients, you can use it for a bunch of stuff and materials. They're actually pretty useful. So turn that to black, and then for our material, let's turn diffuse to black and diffuse mount to 0. We're going to use luminosity to texture these. So let's turn luminosity up to 1. Okay, it's white, looking fine. And then we'll just add some, under processing, use the variation texture, and then we'll right click and set that to luminous amount, sort of going off or luminous color, kind of off screen here. But set that to luminous color, and then we can use this gradient based on particle ID to add some colors there. So I think I have this gradient. So again, like I said, you can use these little preset things. So I had saved just like a temp gradient from earlier. I always have like a temp preset that I use to get, sort of widen these out a little bit, to just basically copy paste gradients between different things. I would just save a temp and then go to another gradient and load up a temp. I've got some other ones in here. We should probably, like orange to red and pink to blue. I wonder if we should really just release a pack of gradients that people could put in their configs just to have them available. That would be cool. So anyway, you can see what's going on here, right? So we've got our particles, and before we set up our render Booleans, let's just set up our camera real quick. No, actually, let's do a render Booleans, then we'll do our camera. So for the render Boolean, we need to create a mesh that will cut through these particles. And we're going to use mesh ops and our curve meshes here to do that. So in the meantime, I am going to hide that, and we'll go to perspective view here. And here you can kind of see that Apple logo, how it sort of is visible in there when I go back and forth. So let's go in here and sort of set up our mesh operations. So I'm going to turn off the replicator for now, and I'm going to turn on the Apple logo. And the first thing I want at the bottom of the stack is our morph to the heart, because everything that we're going to add above it, sort of thickening it and you know, turning into a render Boolean, it needs to be able to morph first. So the first thing we'll do is morph. So on the vertex map, I've got my heart there. I just right click and say add morph influence. There it is. I always take my, if I show locators here, like you'll see that locator in the middle. I always take my, I can hide my particle clouds now, and I can hide my fall offs. So I always group, Control G group my morph deformers, because I think it was the first deformer they ever wrote, and the eyeball is also the enable. And so if you don't want to see this thing on screen there, you actually have to, and not disable it, you need to put it in a group and then hide it, and you won't see it. So what's this other locator I'm looking at? Oh, that's my particle random modifier, particle sieve modifier. I don't need to see any of these locators. So again, like, you know, there's my morph locator. I always think that's just cluttery. And so, you know, put it in a group and hide it. That's great. So, and let's, you know, turn this back to 0%. And we can deal with this a little bit later in terms of where we're going to animate it doing the morph during the spin. But important thing was to get that morph down first at the bottom of our stack of deformers and mesh operations. And the next one I'm going to add is just a freeze. So add operator, freeze. And that's going to freeze it into polygon. There we go. And you'll also notice it's got a ton of vertices. So again, I think you want to keep it simple. And geez, I wish like MODO had a more sophisticated way of doing this. It'd be nice to have sort of a built-in curve rebuild on this, and then freeze to the number of vertices in the curve rebuild. You can set that up, I suppose, manually, but I don't even know if you can. But anyway, the only way to sort of break out of this is you can subdivide curves, the fixed subdivided fixed spans. You turn that on, you see it just got even denser, but you can crank this up to like, you know, 70 or something and get much fewer points, and that's plenty. We don't need a ton of points for this, right? It doesn't need to be super accurate. Okay, so in fact, I'm gonna turn it like 80. So not a lot of points. That's good. So it's frozen, and then we're going to add an operator called thicken, and we're going to thicken it. So let me just turn my replicator back on to see how thick we want this. We want to get it all the way through here. So I just say like, oh, we want to thicken from both sides. So it goes, you know, forward and backwards on Z. 3, looks like it's cutting through there pretty good, right? And so we're looking through the camera here. It's going to chop out those particles when I turn this into a render Boolean. So, okay, so that's good. We need to do the same thing for the leaf. So we'll turn the leaf on. And again, we will do a freeze. This one doesn't morph, right? The leaf, we're just going to move out of the way when it morphs to the heart. So we'll freeze it, fix spans, like 80, and then thicken that. And we'll say offset to, whoops, both sides, offset to 3, boom, got a leaf. So those are in there. Now, both of these we also want to turn into render Booleans. So let's add a couple of render Booleans into the scene. So got a render Boolean here. And for render Boolean, just double tap escape to clear out my thing here. We want to use, click use surface, and we want to pick Apple logo. And then we want to add another render Boolean, and we'll do the same thing, but for the leaf. So render Boolean, we'll just rename these to keep them straight. So render Boolean leaf. And then render Boolean logo, we'll just call it. And I actually rendered the one I showed earlier in Octane. You can do all this stuff in Octane as well, but I'll just assume most people are using MODO. You should probably use Octane. Octane is great. It's just so fast for all this stuff. So anyway, that one's using the logo, and then this is going to use surface, and it's going to use the leaf. So let's pop back on our preview and see how this is working. So there it is looking through the camera view. We can hide our mesh op stack. Hit render, and boom, there's our, you know, basic thing. We've got, you know, the Apple logo there. It's, you know, we've got a little bit of a thicker stars around the edges. So at this point, you know, here's where you would start art directing the look, right? So let's make these particles a little bit smaller. Here, I think they're a little bit too big. A little more denser on that first sphere. So I want them sort of denser around the first sphere, less dense even if I, you know, want to turn, you know, that most innermost sphere. If I want to get less particles in there, I can do that. So maybe the Apple logo is more distinct. you know, and we can up the particles around the two curve particle generators. However you want to do it. I'm not going to mess around with it here, but that's the base, that's the gist of it, right? And then the cool thing, of course, is because MODO has using a stack, if I go here and I morph to the heart, that heart will then be frozen, and then that heart will then be thickened, and then the heart will then be fed into the render boolean. So turn that morph strength to 100%. Now here's where we have a bit of an issue, which we can totally fix with mesh operations. But if you look at it, if I go back up here, and I have it frozen and thickened, you'll see like, this doesn't seem to be working. Why isn't it cutting out my render boolean working there? And the reason is, if I look at the heart, and I'm just going to isolate it. So I have isolate select, which is just this button right here. I have it on my display pie menu, my control 1, where I toggle lights and cameras. That's a really good place to have it, I think. You can see what happened. Like the normals got flipped. And so when things get extruded in MODO, or a curve extrude, or a thicken, or whatever, like there's some algorithm, or the algorithm being used looks at the concavity and convexity of these curves or the polygons to determine which way the normals go. And the apple and the heart are different, and it thinks the heart's one way and the apple's the other way. And so essentially what happens here, if I were to animate this, we'll just start on frame like 60, we'll set strength to 0 and keyframe it, and we'll go to frame 70. We'll just, or how about 80? We'll do it over 20 frames, and we'll go to 100. Somewhere along the line, these particles, or these polygons flipped, right? So if I just start stepping back, if you go to item mode and shift left arrow and right arrow, you can go frames. And so here I can, just going to frames, here I can see it, you know, morphing here, and then boom, frame 78, it flips. So we can adjust this, no problem. You also notice that all the polygons flip except this front one. This front one stays right the whole time, right? So that looks, you know, it's like if I go back, it's like good, but everything but the front one flips. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna select that front one, and then we're gonna go add operator, and we'll do flip. Is it a flip or a line? I think it's flip. Polygon flip, there it is. And hit enter. And so because I had that front guy selected, that front polygon selected, it automatically did a select by index selection modifier on there. And that's polygon number 97, so it had to select it and it flipped it. But we don't actually want to flip that one, we want to invert our selection. We want to flip everything but that one. Now, we also want to keyframe this because we don't want to flip it the whole time, you just want to flip it, you know, frame 78. So frame, if I go, again, I want to go to item mode and shift left arrow. So frame 77, I don't want this enabled. I'm going to turn it off because everything was looking fine, or at least I thought it was. Oh, whoops. Turn off my polygon flip there. So go forward. Frame 78 is where we get the flip. So frame 77, we're going to keyframe that off, and then frame 78, we're going to keyframe it on. And now our render boolean never inverts. Okay, so again, prior to mesh ops, you wouldn't be able to do this. So, you know, mesh ops are super useful for this kind of thing. You know, being able to, you know, select things procedurally and animate modeling operations is pretty sweet. So, okay, so let's take a look. Let's go back to undo my isolate select. Let's look through the camera. Let's pop open a render viewport, and let's see if this does indeed work. And it did. There's my heart, except it has a leaf on it, so I've got to get rid of that leaf. And so, I'll do set up the animation real quick. I think everybody kind of knows how to do this. I had the Apple logo morphing between, let me just click my little arrows here to get to my morph. Between 60 and 80. So what I'll do is at frame 60, I'll take my leaf, and I'm just going to shift W to keyframe that transforms. And then I'm going to go to frame 80, and I'm going to shift W. I'm going to W to bring up my move tool. I'm just going to move it down inside my heart there. So we took it out of that area. So now it's still acting as a render Boolean, but it's just in the same place as the heart. So it doesn't, it's not affecting it. It's not giving me some weird look. Okay, and then let's set up our camera animation. So camera animation, what I did is I didn't animate this whole starfield. I just animated the camera. So remember our camera is really far away. So I can find it. Where is the camera? Oh, it's hidden. There it is. So it's pretty far away, right? Because we have that really long lens that we're using. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to press L to add a locator. And you do that in item mode, and it adds a locator. And this will be our camera. This will be our camera target. And then we'll do another one that'll be the camera parent. So we'll just call this cam target. So select the camera, select the target, and we will go to camera view and set target. So now it is targeting that null right there. And then let me just select the camera and add another locator. Oh, I actually thought it would do it above the camera if I had it selected, and it does not. So I was fooled. It'd be nice if it didn't add it in the bottom of the list and just added it above the selected one, kind of like adding something in the shader tree. Anyway, we'll call this camera master. And this is going to be what we're going to rotate. So we'll just leave that at the center of the world, and we'll parent our camera and camera target there. And then I usually like to open up 2 different frames to animate, right? So we could turn on, we can leave our Booleans there to view. It'll sort of help us out with this. So let's go to frame 0 or frame 1. We'll just go to settings and go 1. We'll go 180 maybe for the number of frames. And we're just going to animate this camera master here, right? So start Shift E to key all the rotation frames. Let's say I want to be there by frame 45. And so, we're going to start here. Actually, then Shift E again to keyframe frame 45, and then go back to frame 1. And this is where we're actually going to start it on the side, right? So we were going to turn this 90. And if these are the Apple logo and the leaf are bothering you, just kind of hide it. You can see right here, we're going to rotate around, right? So from this view here, you can see that we're rotating around to the front, and we're getting this view, right? And so we'll just sit there. And I think what I did in the animation is I just overshot it a little bit. So let's pop this back up, and we'll just bring in this. So let's go maybe 45 to 75, Shift E again. And we're just looking at the Y rotation. In fact, we can take Z and X and just delete those. We're just animating this one channel here. And so right here, we just want to do a little bit of an overshoot. So I'm just adjusting the tangents here. And what that's doing, obviously, is I'm swinging around, I'm overshooting, and then I'm coming back, right? And so right now I have the heart morphing right there. I'm going to actually have that. We have to move that to later on in the animation. We'll just sort of ease this, if it's overshooting too much, we'll just ease off a little bit, but this is about right. So we fly by, go view the logo, and then we're going to shoot all the way over to the heart now. And so we want to land on that around, we'll just do the same thing, maybe 140. Going to, actually I'm just, with this selected, I just press S to create a keyframe there. And, looking at the top here, we're going to just go all the way back. And we're going to look at it from the back. So we're coming here, right? So this should be 180. Oh, it actually was perfectly 180. Actually, what we'll do is we'll just sort of do the same sort of overshoot here. So we're going to wind up on 180, maybe at frame 160. So just Control-C, Control-V to copy that keyframe over. And this one, I'm just going to middle mouse up. And here we're just going to sort of overshoot and then come back in, right? And so I'm going to right click. So again, middle mouse will let you do value, and right mouse will let you do time. So I'm going to right mouse over, and then I'm going to middle mouse down just a little bit. And this sort of gestural working in the graph editor, if you're not used to it, it's really super great. It's really necessary to learn these, do that. You don't want to just use your left mouse and drag it around. Really using the right and the middle mouse is, I think, Mark Brown set this up sort of brilliantly. Like, really just want to use the left or the right and middle mouse buttons to adjust your timings here. So again, we're just sort of swinging back around to the far side, overshooting, and then easing back into the heart, and we'll just sit there for the rest of the animation. I just dragged this tangent out just so we slow into it quite a bit there. And so that's our animation. We just want to make sure during this big swing is where that morph takes place. So we'll just say maybe starting at frame 80, we'll adjust our animations here, both for our morph and that polygon flipping we did. So let's just pop open the stack here. We've got our heart. So we're gonna, change this, and we're also going to grab our polygon flip, enable. So we got two different things here. Let's actually turn on again. So the graph editor here, just this one will show just transforms. We actually don't need to show all transform. Oh, this one will show all animated. This will show all animated. This one will show just transforms, and this one on the far right will show all channels. So we got just all channels and all animated channels. So we can grab our two things here, strength and enable, and we want them to start on 80 instead of 60. So again, I'm just selecting them and then right mouse dragging to slide them in time. And so now this is going to morph. It's going to do our little overshoot, and then it's morphing as we turn here. I got to change the leaf as well. So starting at frame 60, I believe, is the where the morph is going, right? Whoops, I mean frame 80 is where the morph starts going, or 79, 80, that's fine. We also need to change our leaf, start moving down there. So yeah, there we go. So it overshoots the apple, and then it's flipping over to the heart. The leaf moves down, it morphs, does this little polygon flip to fix the inversion, and we're done. So now let's just check our preview before we render, and we will be ready to go. So that's where it's going to end up, right around here, looking good. And I believe the heart was around 60, or the apple was sort of around 60 or so. So that's looking good. So just render it out, add a little motion blur, go into After Effects. I did a little blooming and adding and a little bit of some mattes and things like that, and just, sparkle those stars up with your After Effects filters, and you're done. This took a lot longer than I thought it would. So simple concept, long tutorial. I'm sure everybody skipped around in this one, but, is what it is. It's a Thursday afternoon tutorial.
Yum, yum!